Hi, I'm Terrell Turner, the host of the Business Talk Library, and today I have a great guest on. And as all of you know, my background is accounting and finance, and I love talking to business owners and entrepreneurs. And I love it even more when I get to talk to those that are in the accounting and the finance space. So I want to welcome to the show David Culley from Adept Training. Welcome to the show, David.
Terrell, thank you very much. Great to be here.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, before we jump into Adept Training and talk about, the business, the services, tell us a little bit, what was your background before starting Adept Training?
Sure. Well, I'm an accountant by trade, as you say. I never thought I'd be an accountant. I did a degree. I didn't really know what I wanted to be. I was sort of 18. What do? I don't know. And I did a dual honours degree in law and human resource management to kind of keep my options open. And at the start of my last year, I went to the careers people. And I said, look, I want to do something in business. What do you recommend? And they said accountancy. And I walked out in disgust. I thought I couldn't think of anything more boring than being an accountant. So I left, started work for a fashion company, and got into, they were expanding into Europe, and I started having to analyze their European stores and things like that, and report on performance and then recommend action. And the penny suddenly dropped that's accountancy. Yeah, it wasn't the boring stuff. It was this value adding stuff. So that's what sort of got me into the profession. And I spent a few years in retail. I worked for the John Lewis Partnership, which is a big department store chain here in England. Qualified with them. But in the back of my mind, I always had this thing of I love talking to people, particularly about accountancy, about making a difference, driving your business forward. And so I had this thing in the back of my mind. I'd really like to teach, but I couldn't reconcile the two. I couldn't work out, to me, teaching was a school thing. It wasn't, a business thing. So I was very lucky about 15 years ago. I joined a professional education company. So from then on, really have been, teaching, preparing students mainly for their professional exams, but also their professional development, writing materials and all that sort of thing. And I gradually started finding that, I was doing more and more management and less teaching. And, I think it seems to be a common pattern. Yeah. If you're good at your job, they promote you to manager and you stop doing what you were good at. It's that sort of thing. So at that point, it's about 3 years ago, and I said, no, I'm doing too much management. I'm not doing what I want. I'm going to do teaching. And so that's sort of really where I got to the point of setting myself up as a business.
Awesome, awesome. So what was that, that transition initially like? Like, how did you feel when you went from, the first transition of, moving from, working in the industry to teaching at the education company that you were at?
Now, I should say I'm a risk averse person. Yeah, I think accountants as a group, I think we tend to be quite risk averse, don't we? So I'm not somebody who takes risks, but I was in a job that really wasn't right for me.
Okay.
I wasn't happy. It was stressful. It was, all the sort of the stereotypical, really not a pleasant job. And my wife at the time, she was actually 7 months pregnant, which is, with our first child. It's the one time you really don't start messing about with your career. You just pay the bills, you get the money. And I reflected on it for a long, and I thought, no, actually, you only get one life. Life's too short. If I don't take the step, and I looked around the office and I could see these people just in jobs that they really didn't like. So I took the leap. And I think what gave me the confidence to do it was that thing in the back of my mind. I'd always thought, that the phrase that was given to me was, what's your deepest desire? What is it you really want to do? And for me, it was teaching. And I came to terms with that a long time before I got into teaching, but it was always there in the back of my mind. And actually, things got so bad with the job I was in, I thought, you know what? I've got to move. I can't stay here.
Wow.
So in a sense, I was pushed,
Mhm.
but it was actually the push I needed. And it was a case of turning what was a very negative experience. Suddenly that became something really positive.
Wow. Yeah, and that had to be a pretty big push. I mean, like I said, your wife being pregnant, accountants by nature are risk averse. So yeah, that would have to be a big push.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's funny, I suppose, reflecting on my life and things, because I'm risk averse, I'm not proactive all the time. Um, and therefore, actually looking back, it's when things go badly wrong, that's the catalyst for something really good to happen. And I've learned to spot that pattern. So, you know, roles I've been in roles that have been made redundant twice in my career. And at the time, everybody turns around and says, "Oh, you'll be much better afterwards." And of course, at the time, you think that really doesn't make me feel better. But in hindsight, it was true, because it forced me to stop and think, right, what do I really want out of life? What do I really need? And how am I going to get it?
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, that's an interesting, point, and I think it brings me to the next question I wanted to ask about. What's that journey been like with, getting back into the passion of teaching, but now actually building a business around that passion and that desire? What has that journey been like?
Yeah. It's been challenging. I mean, ironically, I lecture in accountancy and business and finance. So yeah, I should know all these things. But of course, it's one thing to know the academic side. It's another thing to actually do it. And so it was a bit of a leap of faith. And there was a small part of me that was saying, "Oh, maybe you should just stick to a job, stick to what you're doing." So at that time, I was a manager, I was a senior manager, I'd worked my way up to director level. It ticked a lot of what should have been the right boxes, but a bit like I described before, it really wasn't feeling right. And so I sort of took the leap, and I'm not quite sure why I did it, actually. Do you know what I mean? You look back and you sort of think, I'm not sure what drove me into it, other than, I knew that I had to change. I actually left the company, so that the role I was in was made redundant, and there was a new role there. So I didn't take the new role. I left the company, and I didn't know what I was going to do. I certainly didn't have this vision of, I've always wanted to set up my own business, it's going to be brilliant. That was not my vision at all. The vision for me was to teach. That I kept coming back to that thing. And so I thought, okay, what's the best way of realizing that vision? And I realized, actually, it's to set up your own business. And so, I always kept it simple. I think that was the key for me. I had a very clear vision. That's what I want to be. That's what I want to do. I was also fortunate. I had a lot of contacts, and I think that made a huge difference. That I had a lot of people who know me. Teaching is it's something quite personal, isn't it? When you're the relationship between a teacher and a student is quite personal, and therefore, when you're in that situation, whoever's putting you in that situation needs to be able to trust you. And so fortunately, I'd had a lot of people, who I'd worked with in the past, who thought, yeah, okay, you're a safe pair of hands, we'll take a risk on you.
Wow. No, I think that is a very honest perspective, because even as I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, and, some of them say, I really don't completely understand how, like, emotionally, everything was saying, no, don't do it. But it's just like, I could not avoid it. So no, I think that is amazing. So when it comes down to, tell us a little bit about, Adept Training, as far as like the services and the products. What can people expect?
Sure. So it's all to do with personal development and education. So what I do, I design programs, educational programs. I write the materials and then deliver them. And I do any of those three combinations depending on what the client wants. And my specialism is in, obviously within accountancy and business, but I've increasingly come into a niche around businesses driving forward. So, particularly facing with technology. So accountants, obviously technologies, we're all facing change with technology, but accountancy is one of those professions that the more that I researched it, the more that I realized not only is the role fundamentally changing, but there are far too many accountants who are not aware of the scale of this change. So I sort of get a bit evangelical about it, because I think it's such an important message. And what we're seeing is this gap that's growing between so the accountants who are engaged and those who aren't. And ACCA, so that the Accountancy Institute here in the UK, and PwC, they did some research on this, and they found that there's 22% of accountants who are already changing. Yeah, they're already looking at the digital agenda and they're moving forward and they're changing. But as well as that 22, there was another 22% who said, not only are we not changing, but actually we don't even think we're going to change in the next 10 years.
Wow.
And then in the middle, the sort of 55 odd percent in the middle said, well, yeah, we think we should probably change, but we don't quite know what. Now that, to me, that was what sort of drove me forward. So actually a lot of the programs that I developed focus on this. So for example, I look at AI, data analytics, machine learning, deep learning in a commercial context. So what is it? Why is it so important? Why are people getting so caught up in it? Why is it worth so much money? And then the second phase is, what does that mean for us as professional accountants? So how does it change the way that we work? How is technology going to change the skills that are being demanded of us and that sort of thing? So that's really what I deliver in the form of webinars, workshops, conferences, all of that sort of stuff. I've even written a report on the subject. So the report's a very good place to start if people want to find out about me.
Okay, awesome. Now, where can people find you online, or where can they find you on social media to keep up or to understand what you have to offer?
Sure. So I guess, I've got a website, which is www.adept-training.co.uk. So you can read a bit more about me there. I'm on LinkedIn. So I do, that's my main social media where I sort of share ideas and things. So, by all means, direct message me on LinkedIn. That's a very good way. For somebody who talks about technology, I'm not very into Twitter and all of the other variables. And I like to think that somebody using technology, it's about using it for what you need. That's my defense for not having a Twitter. Well, I do have a Twitter account, but that's my defense for not being more active on Twitter. But yeah, so LinkedIn is the main one.
Gotcha. Something that you said that I wanted to go back and ask a follow-up question on was, that's the survey results about some of the the percentage of accountants that were actively making the change, and then those that thought, hey, the change was 10 years off, and those that just seemed out of touch. Did that surprise you at all? Like that, hey, what? Our profession, there's so many people that are just across the board and they have different views, or was that kind of what you expected?
I always find it fascinating when I deliver my programs, because I go in house. So I go into a company, and the first thing I watch for is the culture. And so just from the moment of walking in the door, what does this company feel like? How do they treat me as a visitor? What's the conversation like? What's the engagement? And what I see is two polar opposites. So some people book my workshops because they, like me, feel passionately about the issue.
Okay.
And those people actually, it's a very positive experience, and I feel like I'm engaging with a group of people who really want to be there. And they, without wanting to be too stereotypical, in my experience, they tend to be companies where that's reflected across the culture. Yeah, this is a company where change is accepted, change is celebrated, change is rewarded. And then I go to other companies, often much more established companies, companies that have been in a routine for a long period of time, where what's basically happened is the FD has said, look, David, we need to change. I know we need to change, and I can't get my team to change. So I come in on that level, and I can see a lot of resistance, and I think it's resistance from fear. I think these are people who I described earlier, my experience of saying, this isn't working, so I need to do something different. But there's another reaction to change, and that is, this isn't working, and I'm just going to deny it, and I'm just going to keep going in this same way for as long as I humanly can.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, that's a waste of talent, isn't it? It's a waste of skills. So unfortunately, I do see that. And I see that, I think that gap is only going to grow. There was an article in The Economist just last week, actually, about engaging with technology. And the latest research is saying that although, they're talking about it's going to be worth tens of trillions of dollars a year, AI by 2030, but your average manager in your average company is simply not engaging because it's too much for them to process. And so we see the gap between the Googles and the Facebooks and the Netflix who really engage, and then this growing gap with more and more people being left behind, who of course don't need to be left behind. It's so easy to move on if you know what you're doing.
Yes. Now, I totally agree. I totally agree. And, before we wrap up the interview, one of the questions that I like to ask every guest that comes on is when you think about, your journey and you think about, your expertise and the types of services you provide, what's 2 pieces of advice that you would share with other business owners?
So the first piece of advice is know your niche. So when I started, I thought the best way to run my business was to offer anything that anybody might possibly want. Yeah. So, you want lecturing in finance, I can do. You want lecturing in tax, I'll do anything. And very quickly I realized that's not what people go for. Actually, what the best advice I had was, what is it that you're really good at? What is it that you do that others can't do? And focus on that. And of course, that narrows your pool of target customers, but those customers are really going to appreciate you. So that's the first piece of know your niche. And I think the second thing is to set in your own mind, what does success look like? So for me, as somebody really risk averse, the idea of starting a business was terrifying. Mm-hmm. So I set myself targets. At what point do I give up and go back to the rat race? What is the line? And when I crossed that line, so I had some savings. I worked out how many months will the savings last, and I could see that target. And having that gave me the confidence to say, David, don't panic. I know you haven't got millions of customers yet, but you're okay. Mm-hmm. You haven't reached that point. Just build on that. So set those targets for success, and then keep an eye on them. So those would be my 2 bits of advice, I think.
Awesome. Well, David, thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you for taking time out to share your story and to share the wisdom. So we'll definitely include some links so people can find you online. They can find you on LinkedIn. Hopefully they're not looking for you on Twitter. Look for them on LinkedIn. So thank you for coming on.
Terrell, thank you very much indeed. It's great to be able to talk to you.
Thank you for tuning in to the Business Talk Library. If you like our content, be sure to follow us on social media. And if you want to see more of our exclusive content, you can subscribe and become a member on patreon.com/Business Talk Library. Hey, the Business Talk Library is the place where business makes sense.